And yeah, we're coming towards the very, very, very end. We've been saying this for a while. We are really now coming towards the end of a year-long series of talks about Buddhism through time and space. And in the last few weeks, we've been looking at Buddhism right here and right now, and how we've had to, how Buddhism has needed to be kind of translated and reinterpreted for our culture and our times. And so the last few weeks in particular, we've been looking at Triratna Buddhism, our approach to Buddhism, and particular elements of Buddhism, of the Dharma, that our teacher, Sangha Night, has had to retranslate for our times, revisit for our times. So we had a talk by Satyajyoti looking at stream entry, where we had this delightful picture of balloons being released, a really lovely image I liked. But yeah, looking at how this traditional teaching of the three fetters has been translated by Sangha Night for our times. And then last week we looked at, I believe, the teachings of the group and the individual that Sangha Night has again retranslated and re-emphasised for our times. And this evening I'm going to be looking at the teaching of karma. It's a very famous teaching, not just in Buddhism but in different religions, the teaching of karma. And I'll be looking at how Sangha Night has again brought out different elements of this teaching for our times, re-examined, retranslated this teaching for our times. So that's going to be the topic of tonight's talk. But yeah, I'm just going to start with a question really, which is, well, why do good things happen to us and why do bad things happen to us? Why do they happen to us? So I was reflecting on this last night when I couldn't sleep because because I've got allergy. So I've got allergy, and my baby son Robert's got allergy. So he was crying, he was awake, and I wasn't crying, but I felt a bit like crying. Bummed up and a sore throat. So I was thinking, well, why do bad things happen to us? Why do things happen to us that we don't want? And yeah, I think it's an important question for human beings, and it's one we want an answer to. Why does it happen to us? So in different religions, there are different answers as to why things happen to us. So if you're in a theistic religion, well, God is in control. It's God who decides what happens. This is very kind of basic understanding. So it's just kind of paraphrasing. So in Christianity or Islam, well, God or Allah, they're basically in charge, they're pulling the strings, they're deciding what happens. And in other religions, there's the idea of karma. There's, in Hinduism and in Jainism and Buddhism, there's the idea of karma. And there's different understandings in each of these religions, so it's really important to kind of clarify what karma is and what karma isn't. So there's quite a common interpretation of karma, which I think is influenced by Hinduism, which is basically that everything that happens to you, whether it's good or bad, everything that happens to you is because of your past actions, things that you've done in the past. So if anything good happens to you, that's because you've done something good in the past. And if anything bad happens to you, that's because you've done something bad in the past. And so it could be seen almost like a form of punishment, that the karma is just deciding. So karma is almost like a kind of judge or some kind of authority, some kind of force which is deciding what's going to happen to you, if it's going to be good or bad. And so it's like some kind of cosmic punishment for our bad deeds. So this leads to some unhelpful situations or unhelpful circumstances. You've got the example, quite a famous example, because I'm a football fan, but there was an England manager called Glenn Hoddle in the early 2000s, and he actually lost his job because he had a conversation with a journalist which was along the lines of that anybody with a disability has a disability because of something they did in a previous life. So there's a particular interpretation, understanding of karma, and he lost his job because of that. I don't know if that was karma or not. Why it didn't go very well. In Hinduism in particular, actually, karma, there's quite different meanings to the words karma and dharma that we would understand. So in Hinduism, we heard, when Vajratara came up, we heard a little bit about the caste system. And karma, the idea of karma, as I understand it in Hinduism, is that you were born into a particular caste because of what you did in a previous life. And your dharma, your duty for this lifetime, is to basically bear the suffering of that caste, bear the particular job or role of that caste, however horrible it might be, and then you might get a better shot next time, you might get a better rebirth in the future. So the idea is very much that you don't try and change things, you don't try and change the status quo, but you're, in a way, you're bearing the fruit of what you did in a previous life. So it's very much kind of backwards looking. I'd see this as being backwards looking at kind of what's happening to me now, and then looking backwards and saying, well, that must have been, this is a punishment for what happened to me in the past. And it's very much about not changing things, not changing the status quo. It's about explaining why you are suffering, why bad things are happening to you. And this can lead to, it can lead to cruelty and a lack of compassion. So people who are trapped in the lower castes, like the untouchable caste, there's not much sympathy for them because that's their punishment. That's, they did something bad in the previous life. That's why they're suffering in this lifetime. So it can lead to a lack of compassion. And in 2004 there was a tsunami which devastated lives across much of Asia. There was a massive tsunami which you'll all remember, and it's about over 200,000 people lost their lives across 14 different countries. And some of the interpretations as to why that happened, there were some commentators who claimed that this was collective karma, this was the collective karma of the people, that they were being somehow punished, the universe or the karma was punishing people. So you can get, from what a Buddhist perspective might seem like very cruel or quite a lack of compassion. But it's sad, it's from a Buddhist perspective, unfortunately, this approach to karma has crept into a lot of Buddhist teachings. A lot of Buddhist teachers, a lot of Buddhist traditions will have quite a Hindu-influenced approach to karma, that everything that happens to you is because of what you've done in the past. Everything you've done is is a fruit of what you've done in the past, good or bad. So I went to Sri Lanka in 2010. We went for our honeymoon, me and my wife Lucy, and we kind of ended up with this taxi driver. I don't know. It's kind of we were taken from our first hotel to our second hotel by a particular taxi driver called Ravi, and it was a nice guy, but a bit of a kind of wide boy as well. He's kind of a bit of a geezer. I don't know what the Sri Lankan geezer, but that kind of and he's trying and. But basically, what just decided. I won't say some things, but he took a shine to Lucy, which was someone who I kind of found him a bit difficult because it was our honeymoon and he took a shine to Lucy. One of the outcomes was that he decided he was going to drive us everywhere. He was going to take us. He was only supposed to take us to the first hotel. They ended up saying, "Well, I'll take you on all the trips that you can pay lots of money on, and I'll just take you on them." And because I know all the people and I'll sort it all out. So we ended up having this same guy taking us around the whole of Sri Lanka. And he was a nice guy, and he was very generous the way he acted. But his take on it was that he had been saved from the tsunami by karma. And he also took a shine to us because we were Buddhists as well, because we told him we were Buddhists and we wanted to visit Buddhist places. But there's quite a strong story, but he would usually have been in around the area with tourists where the tsunami hit. And on that particular day, he had taken a shine to another couple of group of tourists, this kind of couple from, I think, Austria or Switzerland. And they insisted on going to visit some nature reserve inland, quite far away from the coast. And he wasn't sure about it, but they were insisting they wanted to go and see this kind of coastal park, this kind of safari park. And so he ended up being away from the tsunami, and the whole of that coast, it's still being rebuilt, but complete devastation. He ended up being saved from that. And his take on it was good karma. For some reason, he'd done something good in a previous life. This was good karma. But also another interpretation of karma that Ravi had was that we were proper Buddhists. We seemed to be proper Buddhists, but he couldn't really be a proper Buddhist because he wasn't a monk. So in Sri Lanka, there's quite a big divide between lay people and monks, and the monks are seen as being the Buddhists. The monks are the ones who will meditate, who will learn about the Dharma. It's quite very, very different to how our approach to Buddhism, where we are able to meditate and learn about the Dharma. Ravi's approach was, well, you guys are proper Buddhists, but maybe in the next lifetime I'll be a Buddhist, but this lifetime I'm not a Buddhist, I can't be a proper Buddhist. So yeah, this approach to karma can lead to a kind of almost like passivity or an apathy that kind of we can't change the status quo. We're just receiving the fruits of our previous lifetime's actions, and also a lack of compassion. When there's quite severe suffering in the world, the response of it's their fault. It can be quite an uncompassionate response. So Sangha Night, who's the founder of our teacher, the teacher of our movement, the founder of Triratna Buddhism, he's put a particular slant to kind of a retranslation on karma and how conditionality works, which I'm going to come to in a moment. But before that, it wasn't something new. He was reintroducing or re-emphasising something that the Buddha taught himself. So the Buddha was very, very clear in the suttas, in the Pali Suttas. There's an episode where the Buddha was questioned by a king called King Milinda, and there was a series of questions that he put to the Buddha, but one of them was about karma and about this very issue. And the Buddha was very clear. So what the Buddha replied to King Milinda was, "Whoever says it is only karma that oppresses feelings is wrong. The ignorant go too far when they say that everything that is experienced is produced as the fruit of karma." So the Buddha is saying to King Milinda, basically it's not the case. Not everything that happens to you is the fruit of karma. And this is quite different to what people would have thought at the time in India, but quite radical actually, quite different to what people would have thought at the time. And there's another sutta where the Buddha encounters a young man called Sivaka, or Malaya Sivaka, a wanderer. And again, this guy Sivaka wants to know what the Buddha's teaching is. He wants to know what the Buddha's approach is. And he says, and the Buddha was called Gautama, that was the Buddha's surname. "Master Gautama, there are some Brahmins and contemplatives who are of this doctrine, this view. Whatever an individual feels, pleasure, pain, neither pleasure nor pain, is entirely caused by what was done before. Now, what would Master Gautama say to that?" And the Buddha replies, I've paraphrased because it's quite a long reply, but it's basically what the Buddha says is, there are some cases where pleasure and pain are caused by biological changes in the body, changes in the seasons, not taking good care of your body, as well as karma. So I say these Brahmins and contemplatives are wrong. So it's quite clear that the Buddha, this contemporary view of a kind of Hindu influence view of karma, that everything that happens to you is because of things you've done in the past, wasn't what the Buddha taught. The Buddha didn't teach this. The Buddha taught conditionality. That was the main teaching of the Buddha, was that everything that happens arises because of conditions, particular conditions. And karma is one of these types of conditions. Karma influences some of the things that happens, but not everything. And so this idea was basically expanded on and became a set of, basically a list, a Buddhist list. We've got lots of Buddhist lists. So about 500 AD, 500 in the Common Era, there's a commentator, a great Buddhist teacher called Bodhinaga, and he developed the idea, he kind of commented on these suttas and developed this theme that the Buddha was saying, well, there's biological conditions, there are changes in the seasons, environmental conditions. He came up with a list where he started to group all the different types of conditions that would influence what happens to you. And basically karma is just one of them, a very, very, very crucial one, just one of them. So Sangha Night is, as far as I know, one of the only Buddhist teachers, the current Buddhist teachers who has really picked up on this list and brought it into light. We kind of reinterpreted it for our age. So they've got funny Pali or Sanskrit names, but they translate it to English. So the first set of conditions is called Utu. And by the way, they've got this name Niyama, which basically just means, as far as I understand, a category or a type, a kind of an order. There are different types of conditions which we call niyamas. But the first one, Utu, is physical laws, the physical conditions that affect us. So things like gravity is an example of a physical law. And interestingly, what what I've been reflecting on this week is I don't understand how these laws work, but it's really important that I know that they work. And I think that's the kind of same with each of the types of laws. I've no idea how. Well, I used to study physics, but it was a long time ago, and I have no idea really how gravity works. But it's really important to know if I fall out of a window, I'm going to hit the floor. So, basically, don't fall out of a window. Really, so it's really important to know how these laws work. Not how they work, but just that they exist, that they work. The second kind of category of laws or types of conditions are the biological conditions. So it's the laws that govern how our bodies work, bacteria develops, how our systems function, all the biological laws. So again, I don't understand any of them, but I'm really grateful for them. And I'm really pleased that these systems work. I have no idea how they work. But then, and then the third group of conditions, the third category is, you could call it psychological conditioning. And also social conditioning and animal instincts. This is a whole kind of group of things that affect our mind and perhaps our emotional state that we haven't got control of really, that they are things that happen to us that you couldn't really call them karmic. They weren't really under our control. And then I'm going to talk a lot about karma, so we'll come back to that. But very briefly, just to introduce this fifth quite mysterious type of thing that might affect us, we call, or Sangha has called the Dharma Niyama, or Buddhist tradition called the Dharma Niyama. And this is really important because it's all the conditions, it's all the factors, all the conditions that would make it possible for us to become a Buddha, for enlightenment to happen, it's a whole series of conditions that lead to Buddhahood. And it's sometimes described as a stream of conditions that we can just enter into or might influence us. And we heard about that with Satyajyoti's talk. Also, it's sometimes described in Buddhism as a force. It can feel like there's a force influencing us, a kind of positive force in the universe, which is influencing us. And Sangha has described that. When he set up this movement, he said it didn't feel like he was setting up a movement, but something was setting a movement up through him. And also, I've heard the people who founded this Buddhist Centre, in a way, just a bit amazed at how it all happened. Really, that kind of how did this amazing centre come about? It's almost like something, like some kind of positive force in the universe seemed to be acting, influencing the situation. So I'll come back to those. But maybe the first point, the important point to draw out is what the Buddha is saying is that basically whatever happens to you, it's pretty impossible sometimes to know why it's happening to you. You can't kind of look back and say, yeah, that's karma, that's because I did something bad in the past. Tsunami hits Asia. It's basically there are different reasons why that could happen, but the main one is a physical reason. Tectonic plates kind of ground together, cause a massive earthquake, and there was a tsunami. It wasn't karma. Well, I don't believe it would be karma. I got sick, I got allergy, Robert got allergy. That's biological facts. I mean, it could be karma. It could be that Robert's did something in his past life, right? it could be karma, but it's most likely that I didn't wash my hands properly when I was changing his nappy or something like that. So there's a biological set of conditioning which has led to me getting allergy. And it's not always karma. There's a whole myriad. There's a whole different set of factors, and often there's just more than one of these sets of factors acting at the same time. All kind of interweave and influencing each other. So it's very, very difficult to kind of often pick out and say, yeah, that's karma. And so the upshot of this for me is that it's not very useful to use karma in that way. It's not very useful to use karma as a way of looking backwards and say, yes, I'm being punished, or that person's being punished. In ancient Indian times and in the Hindu tradition, there was a need or kind of particular focus on why things were happening to people, and because it meant they were in this caste or that caste. So karma was used in that way, but the Buddha used karma in a very different way. And and you could also say in our culture we've become fixated with these first three niyamas, we become very, very good at controlling conditions in the world. We can manipulate conditions, we can control them. We've learned to understand the physical laws, the biological laws, the psychological laws. We've become very good at this. Actually, the thing that causes us suffering, according to the Buddha, is our mind. It's our mind, it's inner conditions that cause us suffering. And this is where Buddhism places real emphasis. The most important of these categories in Buddhism are karma and dharma niyama. So it's a very brief introduction to these types of conditionality, and just really scratching the surface with them in a basic way. But I think if you want to learn more about it, some really interesting papers that Sangha has written recently about these. I'd encourage you to study more about them. But what I'm going to focus on, for the rest of the talk really is the karma and dharma niyama, because this is what the Buddha really focused on. The Buddha focused on karma not as a tool to understand why something's happened, but actually to take responsibility for your own mind and your own suffering. In a way, to decide and take control of what kind of future we want to have, what kind of person we want to become. So karma is a very, very powerful teaching, but if used in the right way, very, very creative teaching if used in the right way. So that's what I want to focus on, is what did the Buddha teach, and what does Sangha actually teach about karma. So I'm just going to keep having drinks because of my allergy, so bear with me. So the focus with karma from the Buddha's teaching and from Sangha teaching is the present. It's not really bothered about the distant past, things that you might have done in the past, or in a way what's going to happen in the distant future. But what can you do in this moment with your mind to change the situation, to transform your mind and to transform how you experience the world? That is, as I see it, the most useful and powerful use of karma. I'm sure you'll be familiar with the Wheel of Life. We've covered the Wheel of Life, which is in the introductory course, and many, many times at Sangha Night. And the Wheel of Life teaches how, in a way, our actions in the present moment influence and condition what our state of mind is going to be. And our state of mind influences how we experience the world. And there's some really, really central teachings of the Buddha, two simple verses, which for me are that almost the whole of Buddhism could be summed up in these two simple verses. So it's well worth memorising these verses by heart, and we'll see. I've not put the book up by accident really, so we'll see if I've managed to memorise them. But in a book called the Dhammapada, which is a collection of what's considered to be some of the earliest teachings and kind of teachings from the mouth of the Buddha, the very, very first two teachings, which I think says something, because the very, very first two teachings in this book, for me, the most important two, and they are that experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. And if you speak or act with an impure mind, suffering will follow, like the hoof of the cart drawn by the ox. That's the first verse. And the second verse is, experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. If you speak or act with a pure mind, then happiness will follow, like a shadow that never departs. So, these are, for me, two very, very core teachings of the Buddha that describe how suffering occurs, how karma works, and what the task is in Buddhism, really. So we place a lot of emphasis in our world on controlling these outer conditions. But the Buddha said our experiences are produced and led by our mind, and the suffering will follow if we speak or act. Depending on the state of our mind, suffering or happiness will follow. So I just wanted to draw out that with looking at how these three things interplay with each other. It's quite similar to the Wheel of Life. We have a diagram on the introductory course that says something like actions, personality, world. And this is kind of retranslating that slightly, but just saying, our actions influence our emotional state, and our emotional state influences how we interpret the world, how we experience the world. And I've just introduced a Buddhist word for people who like Pali and Sanskrit words, a word called samya, which is often translated sometimes as labelling or perception. But for me, it's quite key, because these all interplay with each other, these all interconnect with each other, these influence each other. How we act influences the state of mind we're going to have, and the state of mind influences how we experience the world, how we interpret the world. So, an example. This morning I hadn't had a lot of sleep, and I was experiencing a lurgy, sore throat, and a headache. So, my emotional state was grumpy. I was quite irritable. And my interpretation of this was that it was my wife's fault. It was, I didn't get enough sleep, and I was supposed to get more sleep. And my interpretation started to get into kind of anxiety and catastrophizing. So it's kind of, this was then influencing my emotional state. My emotional state was getting worse. I started to think, I've got a talk to finish. I'm really tired. I'm not going to be able to finish the talk. I started to kind of catastrophize and think, it's going to be a nightmare. It's going to be a disaster. So, I started to interpret the situation, and the situation seemed worse and worse. I seemed doomed, completely doomed. So instead of writing the talk, my actions became, I didn't want to write the talk, so I was just trying to distract myself or do something. I thought, if I have a sleep, maybe I'll feel better. So I tried to sleep, I couldn't. Okay, well, maybe if I tidy my shrine room, I'll feel a bit more Buddhist. So I'll get some inspiration. So I tidied my shrine room. Felt a bit more Buddhist, but I still hadn't written the talk. So this was all kind of feeding itself into just a really unhelpful loop. My emotional state was getting worse. I was creating stories in a way. So samya is quite interesting. Samya leads to something else which is called prapancha. I haven't written that up, but there's a word called prapancha, which is where we just create stories. We create stories about what's happening. And instead of experiencing what's happening, we just experience the stories. And then we kind of act out of those stories, we live in those stories, and our emotional states get created by those stories and fuel the stories. It just becomes self-perpetuating. We're not kind of seeing the world as it is, and we're acting from a kind of, we're acting, our actions are influenced by that, our emotional states become influenced by that. But that can change, this can change as well. I was just thinking of some examples of how we see the world differently. So, meditation actually, it's an obvious one, but hopefully. Sometimes, not every time, but sometimes when I meditate, I open my eyes and it just seems like a completely different world. It seems like just a completely different world to when I close my eyes. It's like, somehow the world's changed. I've opened my eyes and the world's changed. So I'll just be full of my own preoccupations and stories. I'll sit down. Meditation might not feel like it's gone particularly well, or I might have been drifting away, but I open my eyes and suddenly there's flowers on the shrine, and I hadn't even noticed that there was flowers on the shrine, and there's a Buddha sitting there on the shrine. I hadn't even noticed the Buddha was sitting there on the shrine. And all of a sudden I'm just become more aware of my aesthetic appreciation, my kind of sense of beauty has changed, and the world seems to have changed. What's happened is I've acted, I've meditated, my emotional state has changed, and the world seems different. I remember the very first time I meditated, I was taught to meditate at secondary school when I was about 13. I consider myself quite fortunate to have happened. And I remember going out of the chapel where we were meditating into the playground and just thinking, what has happened to the playground? Who changed the playground? And it just seemed like a completely different playground to... Well, make of that what you will. I don't know which Niyama that was. Let's hope it's a good one. So basically, how we interpret things depends on our state of mind. And if we're in a good state of mind, we'll interpret things very, very differently to if we're not in a good state of mind. And so it's really important that we look after our state of mind. And so this is basically the dynamic of the law of karma. We are in charge, we've got control to a certain extent about how this happens. And once we start to become aware of this, we can control this process. we can start to notice, we can become aware of this process and we can change it. And this is really for me what karma, the processes of karma are all about. Yeah, so Sangha has again come up with quite I think a unique interpretation, a slant on this. Quite early on in his teaching, he started to teach these things in the 50s and 60s. He introduced the terms a creative mind and a reactive mind. So he talked about how, in a way we're on autopilot, we're just going round and round, just unaware of what's happening. This process is taking place, we're going round and round, just going in quite similar loops, feeding these stories, just acting in a habitual way, on automatic pilot. And Sangha called this a reactive mind. It's a mind that's just constantly reacting to the situation, reacting to emotional states, things that happen, without really being aware of it. But there's also a phrase which you'll be familiar with, which is called the gap, which Sangha has introduced, a phrase called the gap. So it's possible with awareness, if we start to cultivate awareness, we're introducing a new condition, a different condition into that situation. So the situation changes and we can start to observe this pattern and change it. So there's this term, the creative mind, so we can become in charge of this whole process and just create a completely different scenario. We can create completely different emotional states, completely different interpretations of the world, and we can behave in completely different ways. So we can take charge of this whole process and become very, very creative with it. And the way we do that is through awareness. Through awareness. So, so the question arises really, what kind of person do you want to be? What kind of person do you want to become? And this is a question we ask on the third week of the beginner's course. And when I kind of feel like I'm revisiting really basic teachings, but I think there's a reason for that. It's because they're the heart of Buddhism. They're really core teachings, and there can be a danger with Buddhism that it can seem so simple that we feel like we've done that and we can dismiss that almost. We can forget about it. But these are really basic teachings, simple teachings. But to actually live by them and practice them isn't easy at all. So this is the heart of what it means to be a Buddhist, even though it might seem quite simple. What kind of person do you want to become? Who do you want to become? And this is an important question because we can, if we get an idea of who we want to become, we can then decide. We can use the law of karma to decide how we're going to behave. So we do this experiment, every 3 months or so. We do an experiment, and we invent a set of precepts. We decide the people we admire. We think of the people we inspire, people we want to be like. And we think of how they act, and we produce the 5 precepts in a way. So the 5 precepts give us, it's what the Buddha called skillful action. It's the way of becoming the person we could really become. So for a Buddhist, the ideal is to become an enlightened human being, a fully enlightened human being, so liberated, completely creative, spontaneously compassionate, wise, to be able to see things as they are. So in a way, there's no limit. Buddhism doesn't place a limit on who we can become, on how we can transform ourselves. But the route to do that is living by the 5 precepts. So karma is the route to how we transform who we are. We commit to living by the 5 precepts, and our emotional states start to change, and how we see the world starts to change. I was thinking about this morning. I don't know if this exactly fits, but it seems it's a bit like ethics, meditation, and wisdom. The Buddha taught over and over again a 3-fold path. We need to work on our actions, our states of mind, and how we see the world. They're kind of 3 key things that the Buddha taught again and again and again. How we act, our emotional states, our mental states, and how we see the world. So ethics, meditation, and wisdom. And I'm going to introduce the first of the water themes. I've got 2 water images, and I really like them. The first one, the Buddha used an image of irrigation, and this is an image that just seems really, really powerful to me. The Buddha described that a spiritually mature person would work with their mind like an irrigator draws off water. So It's an image that would be really, I think, really strong image in a kind of farming agricultural society. But I think that it's still quite a powerful image. So if the Buddha is describing our mind as being our flow of mental events, our flow of emotions as being like a river which is flowing along, which is quite an appropriate image really, because it's always changing. In a way, it's never the same. It's just a flow of constantly changing emotions and thoughts just flowing through. And if we, in a way, if we just leave it to its own devices, it will continue to flow. It will just flow in that same direction, or it will kind of dig its own kind of path. It will form its own kind of path. And that's what our mind does. Our mind, if we just let it to its own devices, will just carry on in the same old kind of channels, the same old kind of paths. But what the Buddha said a spiritually mature person can do is draw off the channel of water and send it in a different direction, somewhere they want it to go. So yeah, as using the law of karma as Buddhist practitioners, we can do that. We can start to become aware of the flow of our mind, the flow of our thoughts and emotions, and we can encourage it and train it to flow in a different direction. And we can choose, we can take control of that. We can choose the direction of the flow of our mind over time, gradually over time. Our trains of thoughts, our emotional states will begin to change. It won't happen overnight. It doesn't happen overnight, but very, very gradually. Each time you're sitting down to do the metta bhavana, you're just carving out a new channel. You're just digging out a bit more of that new channel. And maybe you sit down to do the metta bhavana and you still experience the same emotions. The water's still flowing towards kind of resentment or boredom, whatever it's flowing towards, kind of chocolate biscuits, whatever it's flowing towards. But then you're carving out a new path for emotions, and sometimes, without you need to do much, a load of positive emotion will suddenly well up, and your emotion will sometimes just spontaneously flow very powerfully down towards love and compassion in a very different direction. And irrigation for me is a really powerful image of how we work, how karma works, how we work with karma. We're starting to become aware of how our mind is flowing, how our states of mind, our emotions are flowing, and then we're starting to change that. And the way we change that is through meditation. So meditation is really, really powerful. Ethics, by practicing the 5 ethical precepts or the 10 ethical precepts, really, we're redrawing off the flow of our mind in a different direction, and our responses to other people, our responses to people in a different direction. Yeah, so in a way we've got a choice. Do we want the water to flow in the same old places towards a kind of muddy swamp sometimes, a kind of anxiety, catastrophizing, depression, resentment, whatever the kind of our mind flows towards? Or do we want it to flow towards joy, bliss, love, compassion? Because that is possible over time. We can take control of our mind and the flow of our states of mind. So a couple of caveats, just have a sip of peppermint tea. So a couple of caveats about working with karma. And the first one is to be patient. We need to be patient, and patient with ourselves, and just I suppose with other people as well. With other people as well. It's a gradual path. We're gradually reforming our habits, our habitual. We're forming new habits, new positive habits, skillful habits, which will lead to, as the Buddha said, happiness. If we act with a skillful mind, it will lead to happiness. So, but we're doing this gradually. And there's a story, which I don't know where it comes from, but it's a poem in a way. It's a kind of story in a poem, and it's called an autobiography in 5 verses. And it describes the process for me of how I experience working with karma. And the first verse, is: I walk down a road, I fall into a hole, it's not my fault. It takes me a long time to get out of the hole. And the second verse is: I walk down the same road, I remember there's a hole in the road, I fall down the hole, it's not my fault. It takes me a long time to get out. And then the third verse is: I walk down the same road, I remember there's a hole in the road, I try to avoid it, but I fall in the hole. It is my fault. I get out quite quickly. And then the fourth verse is, I walk down the same road, I remember there's a hole in the road, and I walk around the hole. And then the fifth verse is, I walk down a different road. It's just a really great, it's a great metaphor for me of how that gradual path works. In a way, we're just falling down a hole again and again and again. It seems like sometimes it feels like we're not making progress, but very, very gradually we become aware, I've just fallen down that hole again. And then we can do something, that was my fault, I did that thing again. And then we can get out of the hole quite quickly, actually. We start to, our relationship to the in a way, well, the hole is a metaphor for the whatever unhelpful habit our mind gets into. But the hole is a metaphor for that. We realise, actually, we take responsibility for it, which is the Buddha's teaching on karma isn't, well, I fell down the hole, because I did something in a past life, I've got to wait until my next lifetime to get out of the hole. It's, I fell into the hole because of my mind, and it's my responsibility, I can get out of the hole. And so but it's a very powerful teaching, karma, but it takes time, and working with the habits does take time to change them, and eventually you'll realise, there's that hole, I don't have to walk in, I don't have to fall into that hole this time. And it's a really liberating feeling to realise, I'm not going to do that, I'm not going to do that same thing again. And the fifth verse is very interesting, because the fifth verse points at, in a way, one of the key ways we work in karma, one of the key elements of control we eventually have is to change conditions. Rather than going, often, we're influenced by internal conditions, but also external conditions. And basically, our mind just doesn't go down the same path anymore. We don't end up in the same situations. We don't create the same situations anymore. We end up doing different things. So those old situations don't arise anymore. So that fifth verse is interesting. In a way, we have to. One of the main things we can do is change conditions. And that leads me on to the second caveat, the second point I wanted to make about karma, is that there's an element, there's a large element of karma, working with karma, which is about us. It's about me taking control of my mind, my behaviour, and changing it. But then there's also a large element of how conditionality works. These five types, these five niyamas, which is, we have to be also receptive. We need to allow the change to happen. So, for me, this is quite a subtle teaching on karma. It might sound basic to people. For me, it seems quite difficult to grasp that I can't make the change happen. I can't make the results happen. If there's a different kind of state of mind, I can't just, in the meditation, I can't just say, okay, well, I'm not going to be angry. I'm going to be happy. I'm not going to be depressed. I'm going to be experiencing joy. I can't change the mental states. But what I can do is change conditions. By changing conditions, changing my behaviour, doing the meditation practice, new states just arise. It's like Bodhinaga gave a really good talk. An order member called Bodhinaga, who I'm a big fan of, and he gave a talk about this at the recent order convention. And it's along the lines of the mental states arise out of mental states. And the Buddha didn't explain how it happened. The Buddha didn't give a theory or a philosophy and say, this is how mental states create new mental states. What he said was, basically, you work with karma, you change your actions, and the mental states give rise to new mental states. And there's a sutta where the Buddha describes this, I believe it's called the Chaitanya Sutta, but the Buddha describes, he uses this phrase, there's no need for an act of will he goes through, there's a whole, something called the spiral path in Buddhism. So we've got the wheel of life, and we've also got what's called the spiral, which is the positive series of creative changes that can happen, and one leads to the next one. And this particular spiral starts off with ethical behaviour, and it leads to freedom from remorse, and freedom from remorse leads to joy, and joy leads to rapture, and rapture leads to calm, and calm leads to bliss. And then somewhere down the line, insight arises. The Buddha gives an interesting teaching where he says there's no need for an act of will for may freedom from remorse arise. You don't need to have an act of will, I want to be free from remorse, or I'm going to make freedom from remorse happen. What you do is you act ethically. You put your energy, you put your efforts, you put your willed effort into ethical action, and then freedom from remorse arises naturally. You don't need to make it happen, it just arises. And so, yeah, and this happens, as Buddha describes this, through all the series of changes, that each series just arises out of the completion of the one before. And for me, it's quite difficult to get my head around, because I'm used in our culture to just going for goals, setting a goal and going for it, and think, I'm going to make this happen, I'm going to make insight happen really quickly, and or whatever, just trying to force it to happen. And it can lead to kind of ways of working in meditation where we're trying to make something happen. And in a way, what the Buddha is saying with karma is we need to put all our energy, we need to make a really concerted willed effort into where we're at now. We need to change where we're at now and work where we're at now. And the next stage arises out of that. So there's this whole dynamic between being active and being receptive, allowing change to happen. It's almost like we can be so busy trying to make change happen that it stops the fruits from emerging, it stops the change from happening. So there's this whole dynamic between us making a really applied effort with the stage where we're at now, but also something completely new arising out of this stage, which is very, very different to the current stage. It's almost like we can't envisage who we're going to become. I couldn't envisage. If you asked me 10 years ago what kind of person I've become now, there's no way I've been able to imagine the changes that happened and the kind of change that took place. We can't make the change happen. What we do is we apply ourselves to the practices, and the next day, who we're going to become, it just emerges. We become a new person. We become changed by the practices. So, yeah, I feel like I might not have explained that very well, but I think it's really important. So, so I wish I had explained it well. Basically, there's this whole idea of being receptive. We need to allow change to happen, as well as applying ourselves to change. And this becomes really, really important when we start to work with what we call the Dharma Niyama, the Dharma type of conditionality. So karma, and for a Buddhist, working with karma can make us become into a happy human being, a kind of happy, healthy human being, which sounds really great for most of us. That's amazing. To become a happy, healthy human being is amazing, and that's possible by working with the laws of karma. It's entirely possible, and it will happen if you work with the laws of karma. But Buddhism says, well, actually, that's just the launch pad. That's just the starting point. If you become you've got a mind which is positive and gathered and focused, well, then from that can arise something completely different. Actually, something really different, which is the Dharma. The Dharma can start to influence you. The Dharma can start to, in a way, you become something quite different. You become somebody quite different. And so the Dharma Niyama are the series of conditions that lead to Buddhas arising, to us becoming a Buddha or an enlightened being. So it's described poetically in a couple of different ways. It's described as a stream, and it's said that this stream, it's almost like there's this flow of our mind is flowing towards this swamp or wherever it's flowing, but sometimes there's currents flowing through our mind which are leading in very, very different directions, and we might experience that in all kinds of different ways. It might be sometimes you might decide, I think I should go on a course about Buddhism. Maybe I should go on a 6-week course about Buddhism, or maybe I should visit that Buddhist centre. So there's our usual flow of our mind, but every now and then something different might be there's a current of something different. And the more we work with karma, the more we change our mind, the more influence that current starts to have. It's almost like a different current is starting to work on our mind. And people like to interpret it different ways. For some people, it can feel like something coming from outside of them. It's like a current completely from outside of them, almost like a force that seems to be influencing them. And Sangha actually did talk about the Dharma in this way when he founded the movement. There was something was found in the movement through him, a force. And it can feel like sometimes in pujas we can do a practice of puja together collectively, and it feels like we've created something quite tangible, just an atmosphere, something quite tangible gets created by us collectively. And other people might prefer to interpret it as their higher self. It's not something coming from outside of them, it's just their higher self calling to them. That's another way, a poetic way of relating to who we could be. So we've got the idea of this kind of image of a stream and of a force. And for me, I think it was quite, I can't remember exactly when it was, but this came to me when I was reflecting on this talk over the past couple of weeks. I had quite a strong image some time ago. I think it might have been in meditation. I don't know if it was meditation or a study day or something, but this image of, again, a water image. There's just a really strong flow of water, really, really strong, kind of really powerful current of water. And I was standing in the middle of it, perhaps with some waders on or something, kind of waterproof fishing trousers or something. I was standing in the middle of it, and I was building a wall. I was kind of getting bricks and kind of cement and then sticking bricks down in this wall, and that's what I was doing. And then every so often, this flow of water would just break through, just kind of burst open this wall, just kind of break it all apart and just kind of sweep it all away. And I'd quickly try and gather the bricks and put them all back together again. And for me, it feels like a helpful image about how we work with the karma niyama and the dharma niyama. We are using, basically, for me, I interpreted that image as all the time, when I'm acting selfishly, when I'm acting unskillfully, I'm blocking myself off from what's highest in me. And what's highest in me sometimes is compassion, sometimes it's metta, sometimes it's generosity. Really kind of, sometimes it's wisdom. And those forces are there, they're trying to flow, and I'm trying to block them up, I'm trying to stop them from flowing with kind of selfish and unskillful activity. And the work of karma is in a way to get those obstacles out of the way, to get those bricks and remove them. And we do that in different ways, but basically every time you do something selfless, something generous or kind, you're taking one of those bricks away. And then they'll reach a point where those bricks can't hold, the dam can't hold anymore, and it'll just break. The dam will break and the waters will flood. The waters of compassion and wisdom will start to flow. And so for me, that's my image that I find helpful, and hopefully that will shed some light on it. It might not do. But another water image that we're working with karma to try and create the conditions for something for compassion and wisdom to start to flow through us. We're getting towards the end now. That's what I have to say. I think just to sum up to say we don't need to understand how these niyamas work. It seems like it's possible to study them and to kind of study the philosophy of them, and people like to do that, but you don't need to understand how they work. You need to understand that they do work, and you need to take that seriously. You need to if you want to use the law of karma and you want to change your experience of the world, and you want to change your states of mind, then take karma seriously, take the law of karma seriously. You don't need to understand how states arise, you don't need to understand how it all works, but just take it seriously and practice the ethical precepts, live by the ethical precepts. The mindfulness of breathing, practice the mindfulness of breathing. The mindfulness of breathing will lead to awareness. Mindfulness of breathing is what lets you know there's a hole, I'm about to fall into a hole. Because if you cultivate awareness, that's what stops you from falling in the hole. And then the metta bhavana and the ethical practice are what cultivate the new direction for your river, your mind to flow in. So irrigation happens through ethical practice and metta bhavana, through practice for other people, not selfish action, but action for other people, selfless action. The universe isn't fair, and the universe isn't unfair. Good things happen to bad people, bad things happen to good people. Things arise out of conditions. Karma is one of many, many factors influencing what happens. So the universe isn't fair or unfair. But once you understand how the universe works, once you understand the principles of how your experience works, how your mind works, how your mind creates your experience, and how you create your own suffering, well, that's very, very powerful. You can change your mind, you can change your experience of the world. So it's possible to burst open the dam of limiting views and limiting behaviour, and to become a channel for the Dharma to flow, for wisdom and compassion to flow through you and out into the world. So let's do that.